Today I spoke with Guy Futcher. He's the Executive Creative Director at VMLY&R in Singapore, and previously M&C Saatchi, and before that Leo Burnett. We spoke about his role as a creative director and the process of forming campaign ideas. There are some great insights in this one. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, so maybe we could start with what does a creative director do at an ad agency?
Well, look, a creative director is usually in charge of a couple of people, a piece of business or a couple of pieces of business, the creative output on that business. So that means looking after the creative teams that work on that, which can be anything from art directors, copywriters, designers, depending on what industry you're in, can be UX designers, print designers, straight out designers, typographers, all the kind of the bits and pieces or cogs that form up the creative process. But then it's also usually the key point of contact between creative point of contact between the agency and the client. So usually it entails forming a decent relationship with that client and being able to look at their business needs and work out how to solve them creatively, talk them through the creative process, explain to them why they might need to do things in the way that you're recommending them, and then help them through the production process.
Okay. What would be the difference between a design director and a creative director?
Well, I think design directors are obviously focused primarily on the look, visual identity, depending on what type of design you're talking about, which I know there's a lot more than just a visual design, but there's also UX design, etc. I think, we've touched on it before, creative directors can mean a lot of different things depending on what industry you're in, depending on what field you're in, depending on what you specialize. You could probably put 5 creative directors in a room from different agencies and they do different things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd say a regular advertising creative director has probably a more holistic view of the output and the brand. It's almost like a brand creative director.
Okay, so it sounds like when creativity is required to solve a customer's problem, it's your job to guide them through that process and pull the resources together to, I guess, shape that idea and execute it in a way that solves the brief.
Yeah, it's a good way of articulating it. Then it gets even more complicated because I'm an executive creative director, which means I look after that agency's output. So across all the clients, but just on a larger scale, really. It's just a wanky term.
Well, does that mean that creative directors report to you?
Yes.
Okay. So do you manage the practice and
Yeah, well, essentially it's like any management structure where if you've got too many clients to look after individually, you're not going to go spend all day in the daily grind, individual meetings, the nuances of different projects, but you might get the top line picture and come in to help when necessary, or step in and help with the bigger presentations, or keep an overall look on the direction of a brand, but maybe not the day-to-day executions.
Okay. Do you find yourself like on the tools, so to speak, often? Are you quite hands-on?
Yeah, I do. I enjoy that. I always have, but it's one of the pitfalls of moving up the chain in that you technically are on it less and less. And your job is to put people in positions that you trust to execute how you want to execute them. And, it's a little bit, if you're a junior or a writer, art director, you're kind of a pawn on the chessboard. And the more you move up, the more you become the player and rather than the piece. Yeah. Where you've got to put the right people in the right place to solve the right problems. Okay.
So is being hands-on like a conscious choice that you've made? Have you ever tried to be hands-off?
No, I personally haven't tried to be hands-off. I think I'd miss it too much. I mean, there's certainly you you have less time to do it. I think if you're in that role, you often you're always thinking creatively in terms of if a brief goes into your department, I might have that in the back of my head. But whether I spend all the time writing that down and crafting it is a different story. But I at least have that brief percolating in my brain so that when I do give feedback or recommend things, I've technically got some thoughts going around. I just might not sit there and put them into a deck or craft them out or play with them.
Okay. It seems common for creative directors to have copywriting backgrounds.
Yes and no. I'd honestly say I'd be interested to see what the data is, but I'd say there's almost a 50-50 split between creative directors and between art director background and creative director background. I think it's funny. I think anyone can write, but I think you learn design. So I think there's art directors out there that are naturally good writers. I think I'd almost say that creative directors with copywriter backgrounds are at a disadvantage because I can't just pick up InDesign and Photoshop and put something together that I'm thinking of. Whereas an art director who's a half decent student or, is not bad can still write a paragraph of copy that sounds very good. But yeah, maybe I know there's no hard and fast rules. I wouldn't say that. I think the more holistically you think at a process and don't think of one discipline, the better off you'll be.
Okay. But does the creative process usually start with writing?
Not necessarily. Definitely not necessarily. I mean, look at some of the biggest campaigns in the world and they might have started visually. I don't know, you look at the Bravia balls, all the colored balls falling down a hill in San Francisco. It's a beautiful music. I don't think there was really the words would have been written right at the end of the process. Often you get a brief and, you'll think about the visual first. What's going to differentiate this product or brand visually in the market? And then the words will follow. There's really no hard and fast rule. Okay.
So we did touch on this briefly yesterday, of like the components of a brief. But would you mind like recapping what that brief looks like and kind of what you try to do with it?
A brief, I think we talked about. So a brief usually comes in from a client, which you'd call a business brief. So they've got kind of marketing objectives. They want an uplift in sales. They want to convert. They want membership to increase. They want to drive awareness. And then a strategist will usually look at that and go, how are we going to do that? Or we want to tell people a certain message. We want to tell them that this is the best, this is the fastest, this is the cheapest, or this product is the longest lasting, or maybe more of an emotive kind of piece, like you'll be the coolest. This will make you feel good about yourself, etc. And that's all kind of strategic. But the creatives, I guess, get the end of that process, which is a very succinct one-page document that will say, usually have a few kind of boxes on it or sections. And different agencies do it in different ways. Some might have like 6 sentences of copy and that's the whole brief. Others will have, 2 or 3 pages. Generally though, there's, they all fall under similar categories. They always have like set up the problem. This is the problem, currently there are too many beers in the market and, no one really knows the difference between them. And everyone's a bit sick of beer. So the solution, which is the strategy that they kind of put in, they'll say the solution is that, this wine company is launching and wants people to move from beer to wine by telling them that it's a low-fat wine. I don't know, I'm making this up.
Yeah.
And they're gonna. That's how they want to do it. This is kind of what they want to say. This is the messaging. Here's some proof points that you need to use. Sometimes there's a tone of voice. Hey, this brand is well established. They're usually very cheeky and irreverent, and they're not formal, they're not stuffy. So you kind of know what sort of, that you're not going to come up with like a guy in a tuxedo telling you something. No, that's not on brand. That's not on brand. Yeah. And then you've got mandatories. So this is, we need to include this logo. We need to use this typeface. An alcohol brand, so you need to have these, do drink responsibly, et cetera, et cetera. But usually the main thing that's on a creative brief that all creatives look for and that everything is measured against is what they call a single-minded proposition, which is like, what is the one thing you need to take out of this ad once you've made it? And so if it's that, this alcohol this drink will make sure you don't have a beer belly at the end of, the year. And I need to look at that ad, and after all of that stuff's been used in it, I need to at least take out the main point that wine's not going to make you fat. Because you can easily answer those briefs and come back and go, here's an execution that says it's, and you go, that's good, but it says it's tasty. I look at that and go, it's about the taste profile. That's not right.
Yeah.
I look at that and you've written an ad that's really cool, but it's about the origin of the grapes. That's not right. And this ad needs to tell me that it's a healthy wine.
Yeah. Okay. So once you've got that like core proposition or the key message that you want the audience to take away, and in this instance it's low fat, what do you do then? What's your next steps?
I think usually when you get a brief, the part that's probably looked over a bit these days is the research to start with. I think lots of people get stuck into it and go, I need to do this, and like I try and spend quite a bit of time. It used to be going and experiencing the product, go and drive the car, go and drink the wine, go and do this, but usually with time parameters these days and whatnot, it's jumping into the internet, reading about the history of this product, where it's come from, look at the market, compare it to other brands, look at blogs, what do people say about it, what are some unique things that people feel about it, look at the design of it, look at some imagery, kind of fill your brain with tidbits, facts, things that you might be able to pull on and draw on once you come to concepting. That's usually the first part. That's researching as much as I possibly can. And then look, there's so many different ways to start concepting. And it's funny, everyone's quite different. Some people, being a writer, I like to start writing some headlines. I like to start rewriting the proposition. Is a common one, and I usually try and rewrite it in a different tone of voice. So if going back to that wine ad, if it says, you won't have a beer belly at the end of the year if you drink this wine, it's like, I start going, I don't know, more wine, less swine, and a picture of a pig, and I go, I just start writing things that are like, empty the bottle without filling your stomach or without filling your pants. And I just start writing things in ways like that. And I'll just literally try and let it flow. And that's kind of, I think overthinking is something that often blocks people, because you try and work out whether what's in my head's right. Probably none of it's right. Like I just try and, like, my dad has always written, and he says the best way to write is to not edit. And I find the same with concepting. It's just like, 90% of it might be crap, but just get it out on paper and just go, oh, that's kind of funny. That's weird. And I try and separate one side of my brain from the other. So you go, I'm just going to let stuff that comes into my brain out, and then I'll come back to it in an hour with my other side of my brain and go, oh, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to, because you've got all these parameters on a brief, right? You've got like, it's got to be this tone of voice. It's got to be these mandatories, this message. And so if you try and write all that, you're only going to come up with this small amount of like perfect things, but that's going to be quite like rigid and cold. So what's best to do is just write everything and then see how you can somehow link it back to the brief. Well, that's what I find anyway.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. So you've got like, you put your creative hat on where it's like immersive and you go wide, explore lots of different options and just let it flow, and then come back with your critical hat and start to think about how to tie it back to the brief.
Yeah. I find otherwise I set up parameters and I kind of, I'm trying to come up with work that's right, not fun or not emotive.
Yeah. Okay. And do you go by like intuition around when you're exploring these ideas? You got a feeling that there's a good one there. Is there like a process of refinement to make it more memorable and to make it more like engaging and relatable?
Yeah, look, I think one of the benefits certainly of the advertising model is that you work often in teams of two.
Okay.
And so um, in your kind of traditional advertising sense, an art director pairs with a copywriter. So I was fortunate enough to work many years with my partner, and I'd come to him with a half-baked thought, and then he'd go, what if you do this to it? What if you did that to it? And then we'd start going, oh, that's cool. What if we did that to it? Oh, that'd be funny. Oh, no, that's stupid. And you get to a position where you just, if the thought's really interesting, then you can just keep adding layers and layers and building until you go, actually, that's moved so far away from the brief, it doesn't work anymore. Or, yeah. So yeah, look, I think you can certainly build on something, and certainly once you come up with the initial idea, it's very rare for that idea to stay exactly what it is by the time it's gone through you talking to another creative about it, you presenting it to your boss, the creative director, and yourselves presenting it to the accounts team, the strategist coming in and seeing whether it's on brief, you discussing it as a group. If it's a big project, you then discussing it with senior people in the agency, then you presenting it to the client influencing what you originally presented and how to make it more on brand and whether they like it or not and whether they change it. Potentially that idea and that thought and that campaign going into a research to get some feedback, that being optimized, that being changed and tweaked and have more input and consumer insights added to it. And then going through the production process where you engage someone to interpret what you've created as a film or as a piece of print and a different photography style, and what you end up with on TV or online or in print is usually like nothing compared to what you started out with. But we're not artists in that we're just going, I'm going to make something pure what I think. It's like, it's kind of the business implications are always there, and we are in a commercial industry. So a lot of people get, especially when they're young, get like jaded about that. They're like, oh, they've ruined it, they've changed it. And it's like, well, this is kind of the parameters with which we work in. So yeah.
I see a lot of that around, especially in product design.
Yeah.
But like you say, it really is a collaborative effort. It's interesting that you say like 2 is the magic number to sort of start with, it seems, before it goes through the process.
Yeah, look, and look, everyone's different, but 2, typically, I think the way it used to work originally in advertising was in the 60s or however long it was, like you'd have a floor of copywriters that would sit there on typewriters, and then you'd have a different floor of art directors, and the copywriters would write the copy, and then they'd send it down to a different level, and the art directors would try and find the pictures, and it would be very separate. But the best work that's been done is where the words and the art marries together perfectly.
Yeah.
More often these days, it's the words and the user experience, or how that's designed, or how people go through a journey, or an app, or a system like that. And it's I think visuals and words have to work together seamlessly for it to be perfect. So that's the thinking, or the logic behind having twos together, but it's kind of it's a little bit more the merrier. In a way.
I collaborating with people with different viewpoints and obviously different areas of the business is obviously super important for a lot of reasons. But how much of your role do you see yourself as like the custodian of the vision? Like, do you feel that it's your duty to maintain some essence of the original idea, or?
Yeah, that's from an idea point of view. Like, you have to be willing to fight for it. And there's a term they use a lot called pick your battles. It's like, are you really going to, like, trying to keep the idea pure, so the idea still feels right when it's made, so that it still connects with people the way you intended it to. It still makes people feel the same thing you made them when you set out to create it. But I don't think you need to, and keeping the design as pure as possible, because a client's inclination is to make sure it screams product, branding, to look like it's unmistakably that brand. And sometimes if you yell at people with those brand colors and the look and the feel, then people go, I'm being yelled at by an ad. Your job as a creative is to make people feel something, or convince people of something, get the right messaging in. And I guess so sometimes you want to make sure there's a balance between selling and feeling. But at the same time, you can't just do an ad that makes people feel something if they don't know who's making them feel something. So you do need to strike a balance. You're responsible for getting the balance right.
Okay. You touched briefly on how they used to do it in the 60s. You'd have a floor of copywriters and a floor of art directors. So obviously the process has evolved slightly, but it seems that like it's fairly similar in terms of like the principles and the components of how an idea comes together. But have you seen like a difference in how audiences respond to ideas over like the last 10, 20, 30 years? Do they respond to different things these days? Or different?
Yeah, look, I think there was a number of things. Attention spans have gone down massively. And bullshit meters have gone up. Because advertising used to be kind of revered. It was like, stop, there's a really good ad on, and wow, look at this new product. And vacuum cleaners and the way they could hold bowling balls up, it was like amazing. And new products were changing the way people live. You go back to America during those eras, it was like a new thing in the kitchen and a new thing in the house and a new car, and it was like these products were king. Nowadays it's like, shut up, there's so many of them, everyone's yelling at you, everyone's trying to get your attention. And ads are seen as irritating, brands are seen as annoying, and we don't have the time or the patience. We've got so much entertainment at our fingertips. We've got things that we can control, and things we can easily watch what we want, when we want it, how we want it. We don't have to pause for the only box in our house that serves entertainment to play us an ad while we wait. And so brands have to deliver messages faster, and they have to be more entertaining, and they have to be less about selling and more about either entertaining or being relevant to that person and what they want or think, and online advertising, allows us to serve up more relevant content so that, if I look at a barbecue, then I'm suddenly probably going to be served more barbecue ads than meat specials. And I'm it's a little bit more relevant to what I want. And also I think brands have shifted to consumers want to buy into brands that have more, have a bigger purpose in life. So they're not just like a product that you buy into. I want to buy into a philosophy. So a lot of brands have shifted into more philosophical kind of positionings, so I don't just buy into if I buy into a clothing brand, I buy into Patagonia because it's all about like looking after the environment and living harmoniously with the earth or whatever it might be. But there's, Nike's about democratizing elite athleticism, because anyone can be a super athlete. Like it's bigger and more complex than just your old 60s product-based features.
Yeah. So is that the kind of stuff that comes through in the brief then around the brand philosophy as opposed to like a value proposition, or is it one in the same?
It all depends on the brief.
Okay.
It all depends. Like if it's a brief that's about, you're not going to get a Nike brief tomorrow that tells you to come up with a new brand platform because that platform's been established for however many years. But it all depends on whether you're launching a new product, whether it's a promotion, whether it's a, what stage the brand is in and what part of the brand you're talking about. Okay. But certainly there's a lot more like emotive propositions than there, like, because like you go back in the 60s again, when a product came out, it was often the only product, or it differentiated itself in the market by having a unique product benefit. Nowadays, so much of it's the same. Really, what's the difference between 5 different telcos?
Yeah.
And so they have to create something intangible.
Do you think, like, I did read somewhere that in the beginning, like you've just described, you'd have a new product out and you'd just be able to list the features and that's what would sell it. Whereas now you're saying you need to kind of appeal to like people's emotions and make them feel something. How much of that do you think is driven by how saturated markets are and the need to differentiate, or the customers kind of getting more savvy and smarter about when they're being sold to?
I think it's probably both. Like, it's also like the access of how much the headphones you've got on, and when you went to buy them, are you going to take the word of the brand telling you how good they are, or are you going to research online? And because there's hundreds of sites where people can tell you what they think of them. And so you've got access to a lot more information. You've got advocates and enemies out there, people that are telling you how good they are and people telling you how bad they are. And you've got the difference between, a $500 pair of Bose headlines and 20 in that category. And then you've got everything ranging from a $10 pair that's made on the market, that you've got so much information and so much ability. It's almost overwhelming. So there's no one answer.
Okay.
Why it's become the way it has. I think it's very,
Yeah. Okay. I know you've got to head off soon. You got time for one more question?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. If I was reporting into you as a creative director and I was coming to you with a with a campaign idea and I wanted your feedback and guidance, how would you assess that idea? And what questions would you be asking and what are you looking for?
It's a good question. And creative feedback, is something that's given on at many different times during the process by many different people.
Mm-hmm.
My job at the beginning when I see work is there's a few things I evaluate it against. Like, is it new and unique? Because you don't want something that's a different version of something that's been done. First and foremost, I say, what do I feel about it? What does my gut say? Oh, that's cool. Oh no, that's boring. Yeah, wow, that really excites me. Because it's easy to get into analytical mode and start judging it under a certain criteria. Then I start going, wow, that feels really fresh? Is it new? Is it different? Then my more business role side starts going, okay, how relevant is that to the brand? You've just come and presented me something that is really cool and really amazing, but feels more like a Ferrari ad than a Volkswagen ad. And then how that proposition, this thing that's been pre-sold and pre-discussed by our strategists and our team with the client and agreed on, is it answering that brief? Is it answering that brief? And then I have to go, like, is it on budget?
Yeah.
I've been given this, like, are we selling them something that's going to cost this and not that? Then I have to go, all of the little things, are the mandatories going to work? Is the messaging going to work? How do we optimize it? But it's something that someone told to me once, and it's often told to clients. It's like, answer it with yes and, not but, or no but. It's like yes and. It's like, okay, how do I build it? How do I make it better? And if it's early stages of ideation, I try and say, have you thought about this? Have you considered this? Like, how do we make it better? If it's not going to the client for a while and it's just an initial thought, I go, and I like it, I'd go, that's great, but maybe you need to dial up this factor. Is there any way to make this bit more important? You seem to have left out the main point here. How do we make the start more impactful? What's your tone of voice? Have you considered, it's kind of trying to make people's brains open up a little bit if they've come with something and you want to try and get them to see the potential of what they've created. And yeah, hopefully that's a start before all the vultures get at it to and also, like, I always find, like, have an argument about it, try and build the defense about it.
Mm-hmm.
If I always say, like, I encourage, like, creatives and creative directors to debate it. What's good about it? What's crap about it? What's the client going to say that we need to defend it? Like, they'll probably say this. Okay, well, maybe they've got a point if they're going to say that. Let's try and look at why we change it to make it better. What's the consumer going to think? That's the other thing. Is it going to relate to the consumer? Because you and I might like it, but we're just two white dudes, and this is targeted at, middle-aged Indian women, and really, even if it's got to be relatable to them. There's a whole lot of considering factors, but like I say, you don't want to let too much logic get in the way, but in the back of your mind, you've got to be considering those points.
Yeah. Thank you very much, mate. Those are great answers. I think
no worries at all.
Take away there.
Good luck, man.
Yeah, I really do appreciate the help. Like, this project for me, like, it's become really important. In the beginning, it was like a big step for me. I like putting myself out there and stuff, but when I have these chats, I learn so much, and like it's reassuring, and I always come away feeling super pumped. So thanks again.
Awesome,
I know
man.
you're a busy man.
No worries at all, bud. Take care. Stay safe during lockdown, and yeah, keep in touch.
Yeah, will do. Enjoy the rest of your day, mate. See ya.
Take care, you too. Bye.
So that's all for this episode. Big thanks to Guy for speaking with me on such short notice. Hope you enjoyed it. Catch you next time.